teaching a young person, teaching a child, is a gigantic responsibility. Even just through my experience as a guitar teacher, I felt the weight that comes with a parent handing over their kid's mind to be tattooed with ideas. When you're teaching someone young, you are providing them with a foundation to build on, a foundation they probably won't interrogate and challenge until much later on, if they do at all, and a foundation that will be harder than any other idea they hold to challenge, because it's part of the lens they're going to see everything through. It's their starting point, if you get what I'm saying. And so, it's extremely important that the people providing this foundation don't have any ulterior motives. I guess that's how I'd put it. So for me, as a guitar teacher, what I'd say is it's not my place to teach the kid which genre of music is the best. And it is certainly not my job to make a clone of me. It is also most definitely not my place to look at the overall musical scene and say, we're lacking this, or it needs this, so I'm going to teach these up-and-coming musicians to be this way, to counter that, or to feed into this a particular way, and have that become the foundation of their understanding of music, turning them into a tool to shape the landscape into the form I'd prefer. That would be an absolute abuse of my position as someone who's been trusted to educate this young person. As I'm sure you've guessed though, we're not going to be talking about music today. We're going to be talking about gender, sexuality, and equality. Because something was brought to my attention, and I'm going to read you a little piece of a BBC article covering it. Australian students to be taught about male privilege. A state in Australia has launched an education program designed to smash gender stereotypes and tackle the root causes of domestic violence. The Respectful Relationship curriculum will be mandatory in all schools in Victoria from next year. Students will explore issues around social inequality, gender-based violence, and male privilege. However, a report on a 2015 pilot trial accused it of presenting all men as bad and all women as victims. And that seems to be the general flavour of all the articles I've seen covering this. However, I decided to take a look at this curriculum, and it's a bit more foundational than that. A large amount of it is spent teaching children what emotions are and how to read emotions from body language and how to present your emotions and things like that. And then you hit the section about gender and identity, and things get really interesting. You see, it seems clear to me that the people responsible for this aren't trying to provide a solid foundation for students to understand gender and identity, but instead what I think they're trying to do is get them while they're young and shape these kids into the kind of people who will affect the change the creators of this curriculum want to see in society. Why do I think that? Well, let's just take a little look, shall we? Aims. Activities will assist students to analyze the impact of peer and adult actions in maintaining or changing contemporary gender norms. Develop an awareness of the impact of gender norms on the attitudes and behaviors of those entering adolescence. Identify the standards and associated actions that underpin respectful gender relations. There's a bit of a smell there, right? Let's train children to understand what keeps gender norms the same and what changes them. That suggests to me it's going to go a bit beyond just explaining what gender and identity are. In fact, it sounds to me like they're trying to inculcate in their students an attitude or perspective that will lead them to fighting a certain side of a debate that's going on at the moment in society. But hey, maybe my sniffer's off. Let's look at a few more highlights from this curriculum. Here's an activity. Born or made? Thinking about gender. Don't think too hard though, because they're going to immediately tell us what the answer is. Evidence base. Okay. Gender norms. Note they're saying gender norms, not just gender. So I guess they're talking about gender roles, which is a bit different from just saying gender. Anyway, gender norms are those social norms that are differentiated for girls and boys, and men and women. While some gender norms can be positive, such as showing loyalty to family. Well, I mean, if you've got an abusive family, that's not positive. It's context-specific, right? Others can be restrictive and harmful in that they limit people's life choices, lead to inequitable treatment or discrimination, and foster acceptance of gender-based violence. Okay, let's continue. Beliefs about gender norms and roles. Okay, so now they're talking about gender roles, as separate from norms, and as separate from gender, I guess. Weird. Are socially constructed. That is, the types of behaviors considered acceptable, appropriate, or desirable for a person based on their gender are created by societies. Gender norms include attitudes about what it means to act, speak, dress and express oneself as masculine or feminine. I guess your voice breaking is a social construct then. Different gender identities are created through various elements coming together at any point in time, drawing on social expectations which can change depending on where in life's stage an individual is located. Children need to learn about the ways in which gender norms are created and transmitted. They benefit from critical thinking exercises within which they detect and challenge the limiting nature of many traditional gender norms. Everything is masculine, everything is feminine, everything is gendered, and you have to point it all out. Ladies and gents, I think we now know why signs like this exist. Like the curriculum we're zipping through, this sign is also from Australia, from a Whole Foods store that has no relation to the US chain. It asked that people don't use gendered language to avoid triggering or harming people. Are you ready for an entire generation educated to be like this as part of their basic understanding of gender and identity? What a barrel of laughs this will be if it spreads. Anyway, back to the curriculum. They make even clearer the divide they're saying there is between sex and gender. And it is quite extreme. Begin this activity by asking students, what is puberty? Ask students to come up with some definitions. Point out that puberty is the time when the male and female bodies begin to change. At this time, the physical differences between males and females become more evident. Yeah, of course. However, this is also a time of life when social expectations and pressures may also begin to affect boys and girls differently. Also true, while there are different responses to small children based on their gender, some of these responses may increase as they reach puberty. Now here's where it's going to get properly weird. Explain that the changes in the body that fit within the category of changes that happen due to our sex, whether we are born with male or female body parts, and whether male or female hormones are starting to kick in, cause our bodies to change. However, many of the other changes that happen to us, for example to our relationships, feelings, behavior, thoughts, and dreams, occur as a response to our experiences of gender. So, hormones don't affect your feelings at all. No emotional influence from puberty. Fuck off. If people start thinking more about who they're attracted to, not physical, social expectations. If a girl starts to think about having kids in the future, that's purely social. Sex didn't even feed into that social expectation. Just raw increase in physical size doesn't affect behavior? I think it does. I remember it doing so when people were starting to get into rugby when I was a kid. And you think there's no biological explanation for boys being rowdy or competitive or whatever. You think that's purely society. I don't buy it. But it does seem to be what they're going to be teaching kids. So let's skip forward again. And let's look at a different activity called the intergenerational gender machine. Here's their illustration. Blank slate identical babies go in, men and women come out. The idea of the exercise is children are assigned one of these cogs and they have to put together, oh, for men, what goes into this cog to turn them into a man, and what version of this cog do women have that turns them into a woman. One example given being that weddings are traditions that can create expectations for women to always look beautiful. I've never heard that before, and couldn't you argue the opposite in that you get super dressed up for one occasion, so it means the rest of the time you don't have to look like that? It emphasizes that looking like that is only for the most special of occasions. What the fuck do I know about fashion though? I wear Crocs. So they explain that the mapping exercise in the gender machine helps students to gain awareness of the way in which many influences interact in the production of gender norms. Use of visual mapping exercises can help students to comprehend the complexity of these interactions and to think critically about them. Even though individuals can challenge, resist, and interrupt gender norms, they live in a world which is constantly generating gendered images and practices. These images and practices in turn influence expectations and behavior. Can I go ahead and call this indoctrination yet? Or do I have to show you the really batshit thing? Okay, go on then if you're gonna make me show you. The 3D gender machine. Okay, and here's what they're gonna make kids do. For the Making Boys into Men machine, one by one, each student enters the space and initiates a repetitive movement accompanied by a sound, word, or phrase which is associated with making boys into men. For example, the first student makes boxing fists and chants, "You gotta be tough." A second player builds the next component by entering the space and adds repetitive kicking movement while chanting the word football. The rest of the players join in one at a time. Yeah, Australian schools, or in Victoria at least, are implementing gender chants. It looks to me like a guide to some sort of primitive feminist religion. And once the boys and girls have done their versions of the 3D gender machine, they get together to discuss what kind of components they'd want to design into a new generation gender machine that produced a gender-fair world. What kind of boys and girls and men and women would you want it to be producing, they ask. So it's not, oh shit, there's this metaphorical gender machine that traps people into roles. We need to teach people to be individuals and break out of that and do what they want. Instead it's, how should they be indoctrinated instead, children? What's the lesson here? That you need to pummel kids with propaganda so that they'll understand they can make their own choices and come to their own conclusions? That seems kind of backwards to me. Maybe even paradoxical. You know, if you Clockwork Orange someone, if you pull their eyes open and force them to look at a screen that says, you can do whatever you want regardless of gender, it's not going to empower them to do whatever they want regardless of gender. It's just going to burn that message into their mind. And that doesn't mean a whole lot. There's a whole other huge section of this curriculum we could look at, covering violence, in which it defines hiding as violence and making a rude face as psychological violence. But I'd rather not have a headache, and I don't want to inflict that on you either, so maybe another time if you want me to revisit this. And for now, I'm going to end this video by saying it seems clear to me that this is activism disguised as education, designed to be force-fed to and swallowed whole by students, abusing the relationship of trust and authority between student and teacher as a feeding tube. And if that description's too pretentious for you, what I'm saying is, I find this fucking disgusting. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.